Some of what I'll share in this video you've heard before, but hang on until the end because in a little bit I'm going to share with you a new and secret weapon that absolutely devastates and crushes diabetes. If you've watched very many of my videos, you'll know that a major aspect of my philosophy of beating diabetes has to do with glucose spikes. I preach a low-spike diet. A glucose spike is a significant rise in your blood sugar levels after eating a meal. For most people and with most meals, your blood sugar will rise for a while, hit a peak, and then begin to descend until it reaches your baseline level once again. For normal and healthy people, this whole process will be accomplished in about an hour, and their peak glucose level will not exceed 135 milligrams per deciliter, which would be about 7.5 millimoles. For a diabetic or a pre-diabetic, their post-meal glucose spikes are an entirely different story. A healthy, normal individual will hit their glucose peak and almost immediately begin to descend back the other direction. So they have two very good things that are happening in regard to their post-meal glucose peaks. First, they don't rise very high. And second, once they do achieve the summit of their glucose rise, their blood sugar quickly retreats. This is normal. This is healthy. And God made our bodies to do this meal after meal and decade after decade. We do not need to be afraid of glucose rises and falls when they're this mild and this quick. Our bodies were made for this. We can experience these kinds of glucose peaks for 100 years or more and we'll have no problems. Our pancreas will hum along beautifully without incident, happy and healthy. There's absolutely no reason to be afraid of giving your pancreas a little work to do. We don't have to be paranoid about gentle glucose rises. We don't have to decide we must eat 0 carbs at every meal and every day. Your body was made to process a reasonable amount of carbohydrates, and for most people it can easily do this decade after decade until you live into your 90s or beyond. But the key word is reasonable. We were made to process a reasonable amount of carbohydrates in our diet, but that's not the way most people eat today. We gorge ourselves with an ocean of carbs. We stuff ourselves with pastries and sweets of all kinds, with unnatural breakfast cereals and super sugary desserts at every meal. Instead of a more natural 50 to 70 grams of healthy carbs per day, we eat over 100 grams of carbs per meal. And then we throw in 2 or 3 or more good-sized snacks on top of that. People often end up eating 300, 400, even 500 grams of carbs per day, many of them junk carbs, including lots of white flour and sugar, which is distinctly unnatural and unhealthy. As a result, our bodies become more and more inefficient at processing carbs. Our liver and our pancreas become choked with fat. And after many years of dietary abuse, our glucose peaks and spikes look very different than they did when we were young. Let's just give you an example of that. When we were young and everything was working right, let's say this is our baseline level, we would have a peak after a meal that looked maybe something like this, and it might reach 130. So 130 milligrams per deciliter after a meal. And then when you become more diabetic, it looks more like this. It rises higher and it lasts longer. Instead of reaching around 130 or 135 milligrams per deciliter, our blood sugar soars to 175, 200 or beyond once you get into that pre-diabetic or diabetic level. So our glucose is peaking much higher than it used to. And to make matters worse, our blood sugar is not simply hitting a peak and immediately retreating. It's not up and down like this first picture. It's more gradual. It hangs around longer and longer before it starts returning to its baseline level. So 2 very bad things are happening after every meal. Our blood sugar is rising much higher, and it's staying higher much longer. And both of these conditions are disastrous. We may not be fully diabetic yet. Our A1C may be below 6.5, but we are on our way to organ failure, amputations, heart attacks, and strokes. We're headed for the land of diabetes, and we will surely get there. It's just a matter of time. Can anything be done about this situation? You better believe there is something that can be done. There's a word that describes what you really need right now, and that word is intervention. One dictionary defines intervention as the act of interfering with the outcome or course, especially of a condition or process. In terms of diabetes, what that means is stopping diabetes in its tracks and beginning to move in the exact opposite direction. A major part of turning your journey toward diabetes around has to do with these glucose spikes and peaks. When your glucose is spiking too high and staying high too long, you're constantly raising your baseline glucose levels. Your fasting glucose level may progress from a healthy 85 milligrams per deciliter, 4.7 millimoles, to a not-so-great 110 milligrams per deciliter, which would be 6.1 millimoles, to a miserable 170 milligrams per deciliter, 9.4 millimoles, and it can go a lot higher than that. But these are not just numbers. These numbers are a measure of how much damage is being done to your body every day, and how long it's going to take for your organs and your eyes to fail, how soon you may need your legs amputated, and how many years will be lopped off your life. Lousy, too high glucose numbers are essentially your future misery index, FMI. So, how do we get our glucose spikes to retreat and become more moderate? And the answer relates to number one, the carbohydrates we're ingesting, and two, how much time during our days and nights we spend eating. The very worst possible way of eating is to eat lots of carbs and munch on them every waking hour of the day. That is a huge invitation to diabetes. Come and get me. I'm available. We need to do the opposite. We need to eat during a small part of our day. And what foods and meals we do eat, we need to make sure that carbs are very limited, especially the carbs that turn rapidly into sugar once digested. We call these high glycemic foods. Carbohydrates are to diabetes what logs are to a bonfire. The more logs you put on the fire, the higher and hotter the fire burns. And the more carbs you put on your plate, the higher your glucose rises, and eventually you'll become so carb intolerant that not only will you have high glucose peaks, but your blood sugar will take hours and hours to recover once it does go up. The solution is simple. Cut the carbs significantly, not slightly or moderately, but radically. Stop eating all sugar and sugary desserts and foods. Stop eating all grains and rice and pasta and breakfast cereal, and start eating low-carb, low-glycemic foods that will not give you those sky-high glucose spikes. Your glucose meter will be a tremendous help to you in this. By testing your blood sugar before your meals and about an hour and 15 minutes after you finish eating, you'll quickly see which foods will help and which foods need to be forsaken forever. You're probably going to find that you can tolerate garden salads, for example, if you eat them with a low-carb dressing. In fact, there are a number of low-carb vegetables your glucose meter will approve of. Mike-approved foods and vegetables, no problem. And neither is low-carb dairy, such as butter, cheese, and heavy cream, and of course, meat is not a problem. There are certain foods such as chia seeds, flax seeds, lupin flour, and almond flour that have so much fiber and so few net carbs that for most of us they barely raise blood sugar and give us those beautiful, gentle glucose rises, and that is our goal. Remember, the goal is not to have a zero glucose rise. That would be unnatural. Our goal is to have nice, gentle, mild little glucose rises. And there are many low-carb vegetables that can play a role in achieving that goal. Now for the secret weapon that is incredibly powerful in beating diabetes and goes along with these other protocols. For the Beat Diabetes challenges that we will do in the future, and the ones we've done in the past, the two main rules are these. Eat 2 and only 2 meals per day, separated by no more than 6 hours out of the day. So for 6 hours of the day, you can have your 2 meals and only those 6 hours. The rest of your day, the rest of your night, you simply don't eat at all. You don't snack, you don't have meals. 2 meals per day, separated by 6 hours. Either eat breakfast and lunch within 6 hours of each other and skip dinner, or else eat lunch and dinner within 6 hours of each other and skip breakfast. In lieu of the meal that you do skip, you can have a cup of bulletproof coffee, which is basically coffee with some fat added to keep you from getting too hungry. You can put in some cream and butter, or coconut oil and butter, or just coconut oil, or just any kind of a pure fat that's not going to have any carbs to it. Or you could have beef broth or 1 or 2 boiled eggs if you just have to eat something you can actually chew. But here's what I'm going to challenge you to do, this additional rule. Shift any and all low-carb vegetables that you're going to eat for the day to your lunch meal. Make your breakfast and your dinner as close as you can to 0 carbs, so that the only significant carbs you eat will be at lunchtime. In other words, if you're going to have a salad, if you're going to have some broccoli and cheese, some cauliflower and cheese, have it at lunchtime. If you're going to have bulletproof coffee as a substitute for breakfast, and there's not going to be any carbs to that, then for dinner, have steak and eggs or bacon or eggs and sausage for dinner. And make that meal, that dinner meal, somewhat light. Make your lunch meal the heaviest meal of the day and the one that has more carbs than the other meals. Basically, what you want is a breakfast with almost no carbs and a dinner with almost no carbs and a lunch with light carbs. So here is an example, a rough and very crude drawing of the average American's glucose spikes. Big spike for breakfast. He has his pancakes, he has his orange juice and so forth. Big old spike for breakfast. Snack mid-morning, not quite as big a spike, but nevertheless a spike. Then a big spike for lunch. He's got a high-carb lunch. Then another spike when he has his afternoon snack. And then another big spike for supper, and we ran out of room, but there's probably going to be a spike in the evening as he has his late-night snack or his late-evening snack. So this is what it looks like for the average American who is headed toward diabetes. Now, if you do what I just suggested and have bulletproof coffee in the morning and a carnivore meal at night, and the only vegetables you have at all are shifted towards your lunch meal, your glucose chart's going to look more like this. No spike in the morning because all you had was bulletproof coffee. It's all fat. And so there's nothing to spike your blood sugar. A gentle rise for lunch because you had a low-carb meal. Yeah, you had some vegetables, you had some carbs, but it was low-carb, low glycemic, so a gentle rise for lunch and no rise for supper at all. So because you're having a carnivore supper, you're just having some meat and some cheese or some eggs and some hamburger patty, whatever, just a light carnivore meal. So the only carbs you're getting, so to speak, the only real significant carbs is going to be lunch, which means you, instead of having like 6 or 7 spikes during the day, guess what? You're down to 1 spike the entire day. It's not even a spike. It's just a gentle rise. I don't call that a spike. It's a rise. And that's natural and that's normal. What are you doing? You're giving your pancreas a rest. Instead of having a day with constant glucose rising and falling and rising and falling, you're going to have 1 scrawny, mild little glucose rise the entire day. Eating like this is going to be like a powerful magnet pulling your baseline glucose levels down, down, down. Your fasting glucose is going to come down. Your A1C is going to come down. Your daily average blood sugar cannot hardly help from coming down. It is a law of nature and physics that when you have very few glucose spikes, you cannot stay at those high upper glucose levels anymore. It's a near impossibility. Unless you're a type 1 diabetic or you're moving that direction, you should see significant progress quickly. your blood sugar levels will have to retreat. It'll take some longer than others. But when you eat like this, the process is in motion. It's just a matter of time. Remember this, every meal will affect your blood sugar over the next several hours. If you eat a meal that doesn't do much to your blood sugar until your next meal, your pancreas can rest and your body will gain the glorious experience of normal glucose. Now, the dinner meal is especially important because you will not be eating anything after dinner until the next day. And if you eat a meal that will hardly raise your blood sugar, you have just bought your body hours and hours and hours of metabolic rest. Not only will this be the case throughout the evening, but throughout the night as you sleep as well. As you sleep, your pancreas can chill out and experience healing rest. Instead of day after day with huge glucose spikes, you'll have day after day of mild, gentle glucose rises. And while you go about doing your work, enjoying your family, and living your life, healing will take place. Insulin resistance will reverse, and all kinds of health problems will improve or disappear. Energy will return, and you'll say to yourself, why did it take so long for me to figure this out? In summary, shift your salads and your low-carb vegetables to your lunch hour. Make your breakfast and your dinner as close to zero carbs as possible. Cut your window of eating to 6 hours and be done with snacking forever. 2 meals per day, no snacking in between, and watch those glucose levels retreat month by month. And when your doctor tells you you're no longer diabetic and he asks you or she asks you, how in the world did you do this? Give glory to God and leave a comment under one of these videos and share your story of victory. If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our Uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our Uploads page is in the description.